Okay, so I've had a go at doing a beach wave before in the past, but I'm going to break this down step by step on the app Procreate to make it way easier than you imagine. So have a go, follow along, and you will amaze yourself. Like I said in the intro, I think I've come up with a few techniques that are going to make this a lot easier than any previous attempts to render this kind of image. So give it a go, see how you go, and do let me know. In terms of the tools I'm using the app Procreate on the iPad, and the brushes I'm going to be using are the brushes that come free within the app. So within airbrushing, I'm going to use the soft brush, maybe the medium hard brush. Within painting, I'm going to use the dry brush. Within artistic, I'm going to be using the leatherwood brush. Within spray paint, I'm going to be using the flicks. Within luminance, I'm going to be using the nebula brush. And that will probably do it unless I decide differently along the way. In terms of the colours, I've already pre-selected a colour palette in this area. Each of these colours has, in the value area, a hexadecimal code attached to it and linked to it. And all you need to do is take a note of each of these codes that are linked down in the video description, type them into this area one at a time and press enter. The colour will appear up here, and then you can just tap it into this area. Or to save you some time, there's also a link next to the codes that takes you to my Patreon page, and you can download the colour file for free. The canvas size that I've opened is an A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters, and that's at 300 dpi. It is the default A4 size. In terms of the colour profile, just in case the colours don't match when you put in the codes, make sure it's the sRGB, and it's the code that ends in 2.1. It's here on the list within the Procreate app. Having said that, I don't see any reason why you can't follow the process and techniques on a different tablet or a different app. And with all that said and done, let's get started. So on layer 1, I'm going to go to our colour palette, choose the first colour on the top row. We're going to tap in from the circle, drag, and it flood fills the entire canvas. We may as well stay on the same layer for this. We're going to go back to our colours, second colour on the top row. We're going to go to our brushes, airbrushing, soft brush, and we're going to put this size to about 40%, 100% opacity, and really for the middle, we're just going to do a band of that across. Just double over it if you need to. Then I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in by sliding across to about the 50%. Then I'm going to create a new layer this time. I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to use the third colour along. Now it's going to appear darker compared to the other two. I'm going to go in with the soft brush within airbrushing. I'm going to turn the size down to about 3% size and low on the opacity at around 25%. And then we're just going to create some shapes. Now I'm keeping the movement quite circular, and then I'm also dragging the brush across the canvas. You can stay in some areas and create some bigger shapes too. Now I'm not pressing too hard with the brush. Now there's a difference in pressure. You can press hard or you can press light, and the light really, you can go over it a few times and it has a different effect. So I am pressing quite lightly, even though it is at the 25%. So generally with these shapes, I'm going to have them slightly more rounded at the top and then flattening out just at the bottom section. So I'll try that one again. So rounder at the top, and then as it gets to the bottom bit of that cloud, a little bit flatter. Now these are supposed to be quite subtle, quite light. I don't want to make them too dark by going over them too many times. Now generally speaking, at the top of the canvas here, they're going to be some larger shapes. When we get closer to the horizon, the shapes of the clouds are going to get thinner, they're going to get smaller, because they will be further in the distance. So we're going to reserve some of the bigger shapes here for the top area. So we're going to turn it down to 2% size, and then just underneath this, we're going to start building some of this up in smaller shapes. I might even turn the opacity down a little bit further too, to 15%, because obviously as we go further down, we're entering this lighter area too. Again, I'm just doing a series of kind of round shapes as I drag across the screen. I'm also moving up and down to get a real kind of patchy, fragmented series of blobs and shapes. Maybe some gaps too. And then we can come further down. Again, leave some gaps here and there. Allow some clusters. Have some bigger shapes in there too, just to sort of blend them together a little bit if you need to. And then as we get further down, perhaps we'll turn it down even further, 10%. because we are in the lightest region of the sky. And then just a hint of some objects, some clouds that stretch across here as well, but not too many. So that's just going to lay the foundation of what we're going to do for the clouds. So we're going to create a layer on top of that. Click the plus symbol. Back to our colours, we've got a slightly lighter colour. Same brush, and we're going to, for the most part, stay roughly where we were before, but we'll turn the opacity up again, this time to about 30. Keep the size at 2%, maybe perhaps the lower part of 2%, because there is some variation there, even within the same percentage. And then certainly towards the upper part of the clouds, maybe you can add a little bit more of this light colour. Again, I'm not really spending a huge amount of time focused on this. This is just creating a setting, background texture. The scene is more about the water, but I do think we need to have extra things in there too. I think if you create the right kind of background, the right setting, then it will sell the whole picture a little bit better. So I'm roughly aiming in and around the textures we've already created, and they can interplay really quite nicely. You don't need to completely go over them. You don't need to only go over the top of the dark colours, but they definitely should have some overlap. And I might just put the brush up, the top end at 2%, and then I can come up here, some of these darker areas, some of the bigger shapes, and now I'm starting to put in that round shape again, just to go over it. Now clouds are tricky. Now if you are struggling with this stage, then don't worry too much. The water is a separate section, so even if the clouds are proving a bit tricky, which they often do, then don't worry too much. We could just really focus your energies on the water. For that layer, I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just soften that in, maybe to about the 5%. Then I'm going to create a new layer on top. Back to my colours, I'm going to use this palest colour. Now it is going to be quite bright compared to the other two, so maybe I'll put it back, slightly back down, 25%, lower part 2%, and we're just going to use it a little bit more sparingly. Just tap it in, just be a little bit more considered with it. Just in kind of a series of blobs really. And it's just going to pick out some of the highlights of this cloud. It's going to help us perceive it as a slightly sunnier day, I think, which is nice. Again, it's not something you need to spend a huge amount of time on. Okay, and with that layer, I'm also going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur it in again to about the 5%. So we're going to create a new layer, layer 5. I'm going to go to the selection. We're going to go to the rectangle, and we're going to drag a selection. And you can have a couple of goes of this. If it doesn't go exactly where you want it to, let go. And we're going to go back to my colors. I'm going to choose the first color on the middle row, and I'm going to drag to flood fill that area. Deselect. We can also go to the transform, and we can move it down. If it's not exactly where we want it to be, we can move it down a little bit further. I'm probably going to leave it roughly where it was. I'm going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in slightly because that horizon line is just a little bit too sharp as it was. So we're going to blur it up. Don't want to do too much, maybe about the 4% will do. And I'm going to go to that layer, tap on it. I'm going to put on alpha lock, and that means that when I go up with another color now, the only area that it allows me to add anything to is that layer. It won't allow me to extend beyond that horizon line. So with that new color, I'm going to go to the airbrushing, soft brush. I'm going to put it at around 15% size, 100% opacity, and I'm going to roughly aim for about halfway, maybe just a little bit low. Depends on what you've got in your scene, where you've put that horizon line, but I think about around there for me works. I'm then going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur that in slightly. So what we want is really nice darkness at the top and then it just fading in or blending in. So I'll put it to about 20% on the Gaussian blur. Then I'm going to go to the third color with the soft brush still, 2% size, not quite 100%, so 60% opacity. And I'm just going to create a band that cuts across here, And I want it to be kind of irregular. I don't want it to be a straight line, but I also want it to be kind of coming down at a slight angle too. And this is like a distant or middle distant kind of wave that isn't crashing quite like the foreground one, but just does enough to change the kind of color of everything else. So I'm going to put the size up to that to 6%, and again 60% opacity, and then just follow that line across again, and we'll just follow that line across again, then circle back, blend it in again at the bottom, and then back again, and do that a few times like that. That works. Okay, and we're going to create a new layer on top, and we are going to select clipping mask, which means that anything we add to this layer now, again, is going to be preserved or stuck within the confines of the layer that we've already created underneath. So we cannot extend into the sky, and that's the main thing. So on this new layer, we're going to go to our brushes, artistic. We're going to go to the leatherwood brush, but we're going to amend it. So we're going to tap on it, go to the stroke path, and we're going to change the spacing, which is default at 17%, and we're going to put it up to about 45%. I'm going to put the size of the brush at about 2% and the opacity quite low at around 30. And just for this back area, I'm going to lightly bring in some of this texture. Now roughly we want to try and keep it in kind of straight lines. It doesn't hugely matter, but if you're going like in obvious S shapes or wobbles like that, it's going to look a little bit wrong. So roughly try and keep it in straight lines. If you don't think you've achieved that, then it's easy enough to just clear it, start again. You can always do the line, press and hold, and then it snaps into a straight line. You can do that a few times as well. And then once you've done that a couple of times, maybe you can feel that in addition to that, you can do it freehand, just to kind of fill it in a little bit more. I'm going to turn it down to just in the 1%, zoom in a little bit more, maybe turn it down 20% opacity, and then really in this distant area you're going to have a finer version of that, which fundamentally you're probably not going to see very much, but it's there. So I think if someone does want to zoom into your work, then it's going to benefit. Having said that, we are going to blur that in a little bit, so we're going to go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in to about the 3%, and it just takes the edge off it and just gives it a little bit of a softer look in the overall scene. I'm going to go back to the top row, that first colour that we've used, and on this same layer we're going to go back to the airbrushing soft brush, and just along the top of this middle distant wave we're going to add some slight variation in tone. So we're going to put it to 1% size and 25% strength. Zoom in a touch, just rearrange it, and just along here I'm just tapping in some kind of turbulence, some disruption to that top edge, and it can extend below there as well. And it doesn't have to be uniformly across the very top, it can be patchy, and then again, like I said, it can extend down into this lower area too. And then as it comes over here, perhaps it just starts to kind of dissolve away, so maybe it's focused over the side a little bit more. And we can also have a slightly bigger size, so 2% just, and then just some slightly bigger streaks of this coming in here as well, just zoom in a touch. Because when you have water, you have all sorts of variation in texture that is going to be really important to the overall impact and effect. I think we will go in with the artistic leatherwood brush again, slightly larger at the 2%, down to about 10%, and within this area I'm also going to use this just to create some, I'll zoom in a touch, you can see the impact it's having. I'll do it in here so you can see it more clearly. We're not having it there, but at least now you understand. And just have it in this area too, like so. And again, back in with the airbrushing soft brush if you feel that you just want to add some more of this. Again, this is at 2% size, 25% opacity, which was the biggest size we did down here, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so we're going to create a new layer on top, layer 7, go back to our colours, and we're going to go for this new really nice bright colour. First colour on the bottom row. Now at the top of the crashing wave, it's going to be some of the thinner parts, and it's really going to be the brightest kind of aqua colours, the blue-green colour. So we're going to be quite bold initially. Maybe we'll go in with a harder brush, so we'll go in with the medium hard brush, 5% size, not quite 100%, put it down to about 80. And we're just going to start bringing in, tentatively, just the general kind of shape that we're looking for. Something maybe like this. So it just needs to kind of undulate a little bit. Not too much, but to some extent. And if you're not happy where you placed it, you can always go to the selection tool. You can move it. So I'm going to have mine about there. Then back in with the brush, probably extend that down a little bit more as well. Go over it a few times. Well, we can put the brush size up to 10% perhaps. Bring that further down. And you can really see the dramatic colour difference now between the two areas. There we go. Okay, I'm going to go to that layer, put on alpha lock. I'm going to go to my next colour, which is slightly darker, but not too dramatically different. I'm going to put the brush size down. In fact, we'll change to the soft brush, again within airbrushing. But it's a 5% size, 40% opacity, and just along that top edge, I'm going to bring in a hint more darkness, but not too much, just a hint. Then we're going to go to the third colour. Same brush, but put it up to about 10%, turn it down to about a 25% opacity. And then just in this area down here, we're introducing some more of this. So basically we've got a really nice band of this brightest green, a hint darkness on the very top, and then slightly darker and greener as we come further down. We can extend that further down into this bit. And then this colour on the end, the fourth colour, is even greener, so we can add that down in this lower section. That's not to say we won't go back in with the brighter colour, because we probably will, but that's a good foundation to work from. So I'm going to leave that layer, create a layer on top, go back to my brushes. I'm going to go to the Luminance Nebula brush. So I'm going to go to this white colour, and we're not going to start very big. I think around 2% is about right to begin with. But I am going to turn the strength of it down to about 30%. And we're just going to go along this top edge, and we're just going to have some breaks. And it has, if I turn the size of it up, you can see the kind of the effect that it has. It has this really quite turbulent look anyway. I think quite suitable for this type of subject. 2% size, 30% opacity. And initially we just want to create some of that turbulence and broken water and froth here at the very top. So we can alternate the lower part of 2%. You can sort of scribble it in. Some areas can be clusters and blobs, and you know, if you press lightly in and around it, you'll get a series of kind of interesting shapes as well. And I think very quickly it starts to build up that nice impression. We can always go in with another brush and sharpen up some of these details, but this is going to lay the kind of foundation texture, which is really going to help us. I'm going to put that up to the slightly larger on the 2%, zoom back out so we can see the whole canvas, and maybe even bigger, 3%. And then I'm going to do a series of taps as it rolls down the wave and crashes into the water at around this point. So it folds over under its own weight and mass. And as it comes down here, then we're going to get a real crashing point where it hits the water. And then, well, maybe we can have another kind of folding in and collapsing and crashing of the wave in this area too. Back down to the 2. Again, just create a series of blobs and shapes in here. It's really, you know, it doesn't take an awful lot. Just a series of shapes. And in addition to that, we can try maybe on a different layer, just so that if it goes wrong, we've got things differently. We can go back in with the spray paint and flicks. And we'll zoom in a touch. Let's just try the different sizes out. So let's try 3%. Might be a bit strong at 100%, so we're going to turn that down. 50%. In addition to that, we can just add some of this in the mix too. And it just creates that fine kind of mist, fine speckles, fine droplets of water that is really just spraying up as well. And we can have that kind of flying up. Perhaps we could turn the opacity up a little bit more, 60, maybe 70%. We can always dial it back. And obviously we can press on lightly too. If you press on more, I mean, it affects the size if you press on more, but it also affects the strength. So initially maybe we'll just go across the very top of all of this. But some bits are definitely, I think, going to spray up into the air a little bit more. Maybe we could turn the size up, 7%. Let's just, yeah, let's go for some of this. Let's preserve it slightly more in the upper area rather than coming down into this bit. We'll keep it kind of going upwards. I think actually it works better if we've got it slightly smaller. So the 3% creates this finer mist rather than big blobs of it. I think it works better. You can really build that in. Again, we can go back to the previous layer, layer 8, again with the Luminance Nebula brush. So we've not quite finished with that. So again, we're still at the 2% size, 30% opacity. And we can continue building in some more of this too. So add it in amongst the spray. Obviously it's going to collect into bigger collections of water. We're getting a lot of it in here, so we can just sort of allow it to scribble, collect it all together a little bit more. Now in addition to this, we're also going to do this a little bit more controlled in places too. Probably in the same layer, I'll go for the airbrushing soft brush. Same colour, 2% size, 25% opacity, and just a little bit more controlled. We're going to have some kind of streaks, almost lines of texture that kind of collect in here too. It's a little bit more controlled. And the textures kind of combine together really quite nicely. Maybe I'll turn that down even further, 1% size. And then we can have some sort of streaks and bands of this colour. Now again, it can be really quite fragmented, but not quite as turbulent as fragmented as the real froth on the top. So it allows you to just create these kinds of textures, which is a bit different. And then perhaps just in the background here, along that top edge, we can allow it to just define that a little bit better and allow some of these streaks in there as well, not too many. Move it across here. And again, just a hint, slightly more with these bands that cut across too. Back in with the Luminance Nebula, turn it down to 20%. And that allows me to just go in there and be a bit more subtle in places. Maybe even higher, 6%, why not really allow that to soften in some of these areas too. And again, back in with the spray paint flicks, perhaps a slightly larger size for this, 6%, some in here, some up here as well, just really adding to the mix. Turn it back down, 4%, and perhaps we could just collections of different strengths of mist as well. So I'm going to take those two layers, layers 8 and 9. We've kind of done pretty much similar things on both. So I'm going to take layer 9, merge it down with layer 8. So all of that is on one layer now. I'm going to go back to layer 7, and with the airbrushing soft brush, I'm going to go back to some of these darker colours. So I'm going to go back to the second colour on the bottom row, 3% size, 25% opacity, and again, just at this top edge, slightly darken in around the edge. I think it is important to have that separation between the lightest colour and then a slightly dark colour just before it hits the white. I think it does make a difference. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer on top. I'm going to go back to my colours. I'm going to go for the third colour from the right with the soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to put it at 15% size and, well, about 40% opacity initially, and we're just going to build in some bands of these. I'm going to do it gradually, mainly at the bottom, and I don't really want it to crash into, so to speak, the waves. I just want it really down in this bottom section. Perhaps we really probably should put it underneath layer 8, and that way there's no chance of it overlapping on top. Perhaps we also should really put it underneath layer 7, and that works. And I'm going to go to layer 7, turn off the alpha lock. I'm going to go to the eraser, set the eraser to airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to have it quite big at around 10%, but low at around 25% strength opacity. And I'm just going to start getting rid of some of that bottom edge of that blue, just to soften it in slightly. Not that we want to get rid of it completely, but just a bit. I probably do want to go back in and just create a soft version of that colour. So perhaps the second colour on the bottom row, 5% size, 25% strength, and I just want to create, in fact that's too strong, so let's turn it down even further, maybe about 15% strength. And I just want to bring some of that light colour into this area, but not too much. And again, I'm pressing quite lightly too. So we're really starting to get almost like a blending in of the sand colour and that blue colour. And then you'll notice we've got a really nice dark bit here, which I think is an important contrast. And also within layer 7, we're going to go in with the lightest colour with the soft brush down to 2% size, 15% opacity still. And there's going to be, within the water there, perhaps a bit stronger actually, maybe up to 30% strength. Within the water, there's going to be just some things that are folded in there, transparent water, so we'll start to see anything that's floating around inside that water. We'll just have a little bit more visibility like that, but not too much. Then I'm going to go to the top layer, create a new layer on top, and I'm going to have a change of texture this time. So we're going to go to the brushes, painting, dry brush, and we're going to go to the white. I'm going to put the size up to about 7% and the strength down to about 60. And we're just going to start bringing in some of this texture now across in this area. So just slightly underneath where the darkest colour is. So as it comes slightly more into the foreground, we're going to have this texture cutting in. And then I'm going to put it up to about 10%. And that's just really going to helpfully create some nice textures here in the foreground. Now it's not going to do everything for us, but it just creates a really nice set of textures and noise that just gives us a foundation to work from. And we'll allow it to blend into the crashing wave there a little bit too. Like I say, it's not going to do everything for us, but it is going to get us a good deal of the way there, which is brilliant. Stay on the same layer. We're going to go for the airbrushing soft brush, still on the white, lowest part 2% size, 30% opacity, and just like we did up here, we need some bands of texture that are just going to cut through. In fact, let's put it down to the 1%. And we're just going to have some collection of shapes that create sort of streaks and stripes that kind of cut through. They're not straight lines, but they're just collections. So it's not quite as completely fragmented and broken. It will collect into a streak. And I think the combination of that texture that we've laid down, plus some of these streaks, I think it has a really nice combination. And it doesn't take a lot of effort, a lot of work at this point to really bring them together and make them work. And they don't need to be everywhere either. So you can have it thinned out in this area, so there's not too much. And then just a few more in this area. Again, you don't need too much of it. I think what we do need is the very front of that kind of ripple as it comes into the beach. So again, I'm going to go back to the painting, dry brush, put it down to about 4% size, up to about 70% strength, opacity. And I'm just going to build in now kind of the leading edge of the water. Go over it a few times. Again, this is not only going to get us so far, which is fine, because then we can go in with the eraser, set to the soft brush, turn it down, 2% size, 70% opacity, and then we can zoom in And we can just start creating a series of kind of oval shapes that really help build in some different shapes and texture there too. So you can have some large ones and some smaller ones and just sort of mix them together a little bit along this leading edge. And then go back in with the airbrushing soft brush, 1% size, 30% opacity. And again, just like we had some stripes and streaks that all collected together, we can have some bands that cut in into this section too. It really, I think, is an easy way of creating this. It doesn't require a great deal of time and energy put in this region. I think it really does, all the textures start to build together quite simply. I think are really quite effective too. Okay, I'm going to go back to the sand layer. In fact, all of these layers, so we had alpha lock on that first layer, I'm going to turn that off on the layer above it. I'm going to turn off clipping mask, and then the clipping mask and the alpha lock is all disengaged. That means we can go back to the layer that has the sand on it, and we can go to this darker color, which is on the very end of the bottom row, with the soft brush with an airbrushing. And remember, this layer is underneath all the white that we've added. So we can go back into this area now with a brush at around 2% size, 30% opacity, and we can add some slightly darker colors just into the leading edge of this water. And I think it just creates some nice shadow and needed contrast. We can also go back into this area and perhaps even darken that up more. So we'll go to the layer 7 where it had all that nice greeny blue. Go back in with this green colour, 4th on the bottom row. Still with the soft brush, turn it up a touch to 4% size, 30% opacity. And again, we could just maybe build in a bit more of this green. It goes underneath all the white, which is really helpful. And we can just creep that up a little bit more as well until we find that right balance. Now in this area, we're probably going to need some reflection too, because we've got a lot of white here and a lot of white here, but it's not reflected in this bit of the water. Now obviously water is very reflective, so we need to show the impact that it has. So go back to that area with the white, so the top layer with the white, soft brush, 4% size, and it has to be really low. It's around 15%. And then just in this area, just to correspond with that there, we're going to have a hint of a bit more whiteness in that section, not too much. And in there too, we're going to have a hint more whiteness. And I think it's an essential part of it. There you go. I'm going to go with a smaller brush, 2% size, 30% opacity. And I'm just going to spend just a little bit more time adding hints more of this broken white texture in places too. Could even go even more in the background there, just in 1 or 2 spots. It would be easy to go overboard with this kind of texture, but it is just allows you to go in there and just fine tune anything that you're not 100% happy with. Be a little bit more controlled, even up into the spray areas if you want. I'm going to turn it down even to the 1%. Maybe go in here, just exaggerate some of those stripes and streaks, just a hint more. Now, I suppose on the sand layer, we need some slight variation. So we did have more than one type of brown. So we've got that first one, we've got that second one. Perhaps we're going to go in with the soft brush, 3% size, 30% opacity. And again, we've got water on the sand that will reflect some of that colour. So let's just have it impacted on the sand even. And it's a subtlety, but again, it gives it that hint more believability. It might be so subtle that you wouldn't even notice it ordinarily, but it's there nevertheless. And again, we'll go for perhaps this second colour, not quite the white, but a bit more subdued. So it's 4th from the right, 2% size, 20% strength opacity, and just build in a hint of some of this too into the sand, but not too much. Okay, I'm going to leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed watching and perhaps following along too. Do let me know how you've got along. If you want to try something completely different, I've also got an A to Z graffiti alphabet that I really enjoyed doing, and I think you will do too if you have a go. And that's linked up in the corner there. Thanks so much for watching. I shall see you here soon. Bye for now.